Inside this room, all of my dreams become realities, and some of my realities become dreams.
What in the wide, wide world of sports is going on here? Alive! It's alive! It's alive!
You are listening to The Wilder Ride, getting wilder by the minute. Here are your hosts, Alan Sanders and Walt Murray.
Welcome back to the Wilder Ride Listeners Lounge. As you heard from the intro, I'm Alan Sanders, joined as always with my podcast partner of crime, Walt Murray. Walt, how you doing, buddy?
Hey, doing great. How's it going?
We are going to have a magnificent guest today. I think you're going to be at least as excited as I am to have him. I'll just let the cat out of the bag now. Political analyst Bill Crane, but he is so much more than that. He is a respected voice in politics, both sides of the aisle. He's been involved with the chamber. He's been involved with economic development. He's been involved with PR and marketing, owns his own firm. I think this may end up being one of those episodes where you and I will struggle to have more than a few words edgewise once we bring him to the stage.
Well, and that's fine. I've been a fan of politics and the news my whole life, and Bill has definitely, I don't know, for the last 15 or 20 years been a big part of that. And so I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say. And I'm always fascinated by people who are almost like a time capsule, that you can run a 20-year string back and go, hey, they've been involved in, the city of Atlanta or New York or, Washington politics for this amount of time, and thinking about the things that they've seen and been involved with. So I'm looking forward to hearing from him.
Well, the cool thing about Bill is being in PR and marketing, it's about messaging and branding. So he's really good at telling the stories and connecting the dots. So I'm not worried about content. If anything, I'm worried about what I won't be able to keep because it's going to be too much. So,
yeah, and he's probably a guy that we could sit and talk to all day. And,
absolutely.
And end up with a lot of gems out of it. So,
well, before we bring our guest to the stage, as always, it's a chance for you and I to get reacquainted since the last time we met. I'll open this time. I've been camping. This may be the single worst weather week I have ever camped through in my entire life.
No, I was going to say, I was out doing some yard work and I had to run to the store, and I knew that you were camping, and I could kind of see the storm go right through where you were. I was like, yeah, that's going to be a bad one.
So I love thunderstorms. I mean, my wife loves thunderstorms. The Georgia known for, or anywhere, I guess, in the Southeast, you get those summer thunderstorms where it may be raining in your front yard and sunshine in your backyard because they're so localized.
Yeah.
The first time I ever saw that phenomenon, I was like, there's no way. How can a storm be that small? But when they build up over the lake, my goodness, there was a lot of energy. We lost our pop-up shelter over the kitchen area. Oh. Everything got knocked over. One of the ends of the tent, the covering of the tent to keep it from water getting in, flipped up under such a high gust of wind, and water came in sideways from the rain. We probably had, I would guess, 30 gallons of water in our kayaks because they were just sitting upright instead of upside down like you're supposed to do, but I wasn't thinking about it. Everybody along our entire edge of the lake had either lost an awning on their camper, had damage of some kind. Everybody had some kind of damage to whatever was outdoors to help protect you from the sun and the elements because of the wind, the rain, just massive thunder and lightning. And that was just, the second day we were there. It did it again on Saturday. It did it Sunday. We got a brief reprieve. Then yesterday, it did it from 2 o'clock in the afternoon until 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I have never been this soaked without going swimming.
That is brutal. That is brutal. And when you're doing something like that, you're really looking to get away, to have a stress-free couple of days, and then to have all that happen, that's terrible.
Well, the nice thing about where we did the staycationing is last night it was so damp and sticky. Everything was wet. There was like mud on everything from where the rain splashes, and you just kind of get that mud splash on the bottom of everything. I just said, you know what, babe? I need just an air-conditioned, dry room. She goes, I'm with you. As soon as we're done dinner, let's pack up and go home. So we actually came home so we could just have a good night's sleep where it wasn't feeling like we were in an outdoor sauna. It was, I love camping, but this has been the least enjoyable camping week I've ever been on.
I've done a fair amount of camping, not anywhere near as much as you have. And I've always been fairly fortunate to have good weather and good time, getting caught in the rain a couple times. But a friend of mine decided, and this guy is not an outdoors person at all. I mean, like how he makes it to his mailbox and back, no idea. He decided he's going to take the family camping up in North Alabama. So they go drive 4 hours, I guess, into Northwest Alabama. They set up the campsite. He said that he had to YouTube how to set the tent up. So they get everything set up, and it's 97 degrees. And he said that it never really got below 80 and about 100% humidity the whole time they were there. And he's like, oh, we were just miserable. I was like, yeah, because you don't camp like that when it's 97 degrees. Exactly. You do that when it's like 65 degrees. You may get a little cold at night, but you're not sweltering hot. You don't run out of water. And I said, well, did y'all at least get to swim and stuff? He's like, no, we didn't. We weren't near a lake or anything. I was like, what were you doing? Just looking at trees the whole time? He was like, well, the kids were really bored. We finally let them play on the iPad again. I was like, you're a moron. What kind of camping is that? That's what you do to torture your kids, not take care of your, not take your family on a fun vacation. So you tend to do it right. You've learned all the things to avoid except for pop-up storms.
Yeah, I have. I did tell the wife, though, I said, you know what? Let's keep this in mind next year when we think we want to squeeze something in early to mid-August. No, we're not. We won't do that again. We've actually already got one more week planned. We're going to try a different campsite out that we've seen it when we've been boating on the lake. And we're going to do it last week of September, which actually rolls into October. So I'm hoping... because I would rather it be cooler. I don't need it to be sub-freezing temperatures when we're camping, but I would prefer it cooler. You can always throw more covers on the bed. You can always, bring a little radiator heater to put in your tent if you need to just kind of warm things up. You bring a dog or two. They're instant heaters. But you know what? You can only take so many layers of clothes off, and you're still hot.
Right. And you can't really do the naked campground thing in too many places.
Well, you can try, but at some point when it's 80, it doesn't matter if you're naked. It's still 80.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, you're just going to be hot and miserable.
It is. It's hot, miserable. Everything feels sticky. You feel sticky. You could go take a shower up at the camp shower, and by the time you get back to the tent, you feel like you need another shower. It's just, that's not fun to me. So it hasn't been the best camping week. So the coolest thing is, I did tell the wife, I'm like, look, when we set this up, I knew we were going to have a podcast recording. I said, I'm going to have to head back to the house, and I'll be gone for a couple hours. So here I am.
Yeah, sitting in the air conditioning.
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
Well, how about you? Anything you've been doing in this week while I've been sweltering and dodging thunderstorms?
Not really. School started back, so we've been kind of dealing with all that kind of stuff. I'm probably going to spend a little bit of time on the lake. I actually almost took a trip to Yellowstone just to kind of get away for a few days. And I had a plane flight lined up through a friend of mine who works for an airline. He was just going to give me a round trip ticket. And I could not find a hotel that was less than $250 a night anywhere near the park. And so I would have had to get anything below, like 200 or less, I'd have had to have driven 2.5 hours just to get to the park every day. And so I finally was just like, forget it. So I may take a little trip here coming up, but I just couldn't see spending $1,500 for me for 4 or 5 days of.
In a prior life, weren't you a ranger? Did you work DNR?
I wasn't a ranger, but I worked for one of the hotels out there. And in the park. So, I drove the laundry truck. It was awesome.
See, I had this whole mythos around my head of what you were, and I didn't realize you were the laundry PO. So the week this drops, please do not let me forget to post the picture of me jumping the laundry truck over the over the edge of the parking lot. I had the laundry truck, which is this huge freaking box truck. I had it like 3 feet in the air,
And this truck was probably already 20 years old. I hit the ground. I was like, I have killed the truck. That thing kept going. I mean, it was like a tank, but I rattled the back, but I mean, it was crazy. And I was, at the time I was a pretty straight-laced, decently straight-laced guy. And so I would drive the laundry truck out to do the laundry deliveries and pickups for all the people who clean the cabins. And the two guys in the back would smoke weed and give out the laundry and pick up the other laundry. So I'm driving the thing, and they're like, "Oh yeah, just cut through the woods. You can do that." I was like, "Cut through the woods? What are you kidding?" So,
wow.
So yes, I have some great memories. I loved it. It's such an awesome, amazing place, and but I just figured it'd be a good place for me to go decompress for a couple of days. But I didn't want to spend a ridiculous amount of money just for me to go. And
with your knowledge of the place, they don't have like cabins or things that would be cheaper, or were those already booked?
They're already booked, man. They are booked solid. And I guess they're also not at 100%. It looks like they're probably at like 75%, just because of COVID. So
gotcha.
And all the employees live in dorms out there, so I'm sure they're having to go with a bit of a skeleton crew. And so it looked like maybe next year I need to go do that for a few days.
Okay. Anything else going on before we get to our guest?
No, not really. Just I am kind of done with COVID. It doesn't look like COVID's done with us, but I'm really just ready for things to get back to normal. Football's now starting to get canceled. It's like this never-ending curse that we can't get rid of. And
I almost think we built it up to the point where it's too hard to take it away now.
I agree with you. I think that I was looking at some of the methodology today on deciding whether schools close or not, and it's just it has gotten just insane. It's insane. So I'm just ready for this insanity to be over with. But I guess we'll have to wait till after the first week in November before things start calming down with COVID.
Let's hope so. All right. Well, you know what? This is a perfect segue. Let's go ahead and bring in our guest. We mentioned him before, but Bill Crane, political analyst with WSB-TV in Atlanta, as well as a political analyst on the radio, WSB 95.5, Atlanta's News and Talk, also on the AM 750. He's got a great background in politics. He's got a background in helping with campaigns. He's been part of a chamber of commerce in Atlanta. He's been there when the Olympics were coming through, part of a conglomerate of decision makers that really put Hotlanta on the map to where Georgia is one of the most in fact, it is the friendliest state to do business in. Our governor, Brian Kemp, has said multiple times, has used that as a selling point for the last several years, continues to be the number one place to do business. So let's welcome to our stage, Bill Crane.
Alan, Walt, good to be with you. Looking forward to a wild ride.
That's the name of the show, man. Well, let's before we get too much into the beginning, I want to level set for the audience. You and I have gotten pretty well acquainted over the last year, up until COVID-19 kind of curtailed our activities. You and I were basically being tasked for a while with the WSB coverage of all of the upcoming the debates, the primary debates, and had a great time in studios when we were at 18, 20 candidates on the Democrat side, watching them try to whittle themselves down to the final contenders.
I can even remember, Alan, the first time you interviewed me. It was a Saturday morning when you were subbing. I don't remember who for, but I happened to be at a funeral up in the Sandy Springs area with a very rambunctious daughter, trying to keep her contained while talking to you on a Saturday morning in my ear and keeping her from doing things you don't want to do in a family visitation. So yeah, we've known each other for a good bit.
We've had a lot of fun having these conversations, and as you know, in radio, sometimes those off-air conversations are every bit as stimulating as what we're putting on air.
Well, they're actually better, but unfortunately, we've got a ton of the audience, and including some thoughts that probably wouldn't go over well if shared with a broad public audience.
Let's talk before we get into your current run with WSB, both television and radio. Let's kind of go back. You share an alma mater with my two eldest children. You are a graduate of the University of Georgia in Athens.
I'm a dog, native Georgian, grew up in a newspaper family, And after I got out of Georgia, I went into work in broadcasting in Macon, Georgia at WMAZ, a CBS affiliate. And after that, worked for a host of elected officials, which we can decide if we want to talk about or not. Did some economic development marketing, and then went into the PR business with a global agency back in 1999, and have never really left that field, though I got back into broadcasting and started doing political analysis and commentary initially of XIA 11 Live News back in 2000.
So, Bill, what part of Georgia are you from originally?
Metro Atlanta and Decatur specifically. Went to Lakeside High School and grew up kind of in the unincorporated part of DeKalb that's now being fought over to be one of 3 or 4 different named cities, most recently Vista Grove. But the area that's sort of between what you would now know as Brookhaven and Tucker would be my stomping grounds. And I live now in Scottdale, which is a somewhat adjacent unincorporated part of DeKalb. But your listeners might be familiar with the DeKalb Farmers Market. That's a literal stone's throw, about a mile from my house. Okay,
so you like I am. I'm a longtime Atlanta resident, longtime Georgia resident. So your family, being in the newspaper business, what, as you were looking at your career, made you decide to go into broadcasting instead of into print journalism?
We had at peak 8 weekly newspapers, mostly on the southern crescent, starting in DeKalb and going south around the horn, if you will, of Metro Atlanta, Fayette County, Clayton County, Henry County. And I loved my family. But in that building in Decatur where they all worked, my grandparents, my aunt, my uncle, some cousins, my mother for a time, were all under one roof. And although there were 300 some odd other employees at peak, that was a lot of family togetherness. So I spent summers during high school and college working for them and reorganizing the morgue files and running tear sheets, which is something you did in those days to show the ad had run as proof to the client. And then you would pick up the artwork manually. We didn't have the internet back then on the week before. Realizing that as much as I love the news business, and particularly the political side of news, I did not want to wake up every morning seeing my family, get in the car, drive to work, see my family, turn around, come back and see my family. That would have driven me crazy. So I decided I needed to find something in an adjacent field, and I had done a bunch of community theater as a child and one motion picture and a couple of 3 or 4 years, I guess, almost of a local television show on Channel 2. So I decided, since I wasn't as talented an actor as Alan, that I needed to find a way to deal with that ego and visibility that would allow me still to be in the news business. And then that's why I picked broadcasting. So when I went to Georgia, instead of majoring in print journalism, I then called telecommunications arts, with a minor split in political science and history.
Oh, all right. Oh. So after graduation, where did you end up kind of rolling outside of the family business? What was sort of like, hey, this is my path I'm forging for myself?
Well, it wasn't without some dispute within the family, I'll put it that way. But there were plenty of other children besides me in the next generation coming. I just happened to be the oldest. But the thinking at the time was, one of my siblings or one of my cousins, and one of them would stay in the family business and carry it forward. It ended up that after a couple of very lucrative offers were declined by my grandmother, Mary Crane, who I'll just say, smiling towards heaven, was her own version of Angela Channing from Falcon's Crest. A little nicer, but still that Irish maiden who controlled the roost. She declined an offer from Gannett, which would have made all of us living very comfortably even today. And that was taken up by the Times of Gainesville, and that's where USA Today's Southeastern printing operations were based. But we sold eventually in 1996, and Dad retired, and by that time I was well into my career, but I decided to go into television, so I ended up initially at a CBS affiliate in Macon, Georgia, and then kept trying to crack the Atlanta market and being told, get some gray hair, kid, come back in 20 years, kid. And I didn't know that it would work out that way, but I went to work first for Max Cleland, who was then Georgia Secretary of State, as his press secretary. I sort of fell into that opportunity. It's an interesting story in and of itself if we have the time. And then I was covering and witnessing an execution at the Jackson Diagnostic Correction Center in 1985. Roosevelt Green was the inmate who was going to be executed. And I had covered outside the building 2 prior executions. And I wanted to know for myself, being then and now pro capital punishment, if it was cruel or inhuman, how it went down. So I witnessed it. It was very memorable. They were still using the electric chair they called Old Sparky back then. And it's a very small building that's apart from the rest of the campus. It's a small cinder block building. The inmate is on the other side of plexiglass, kind of what you would see at a bank teller or bank operation prior to COVID, the thick plexiglass. You can hear them. There's a sound from that room piped in. And then, of course, after the voltages run through and they are declared dead, and it took 2 shots of the juice to take out Mr. Green, then you're paraded out. Well, you don't think about things like charred flesh. And so as you're leaving this small cinder block building, there's a very large exhaust fan pumping those fumes out of the room where the inmate has just been electrocuted, and it's a very distinct smell. So there were 3 media witnesses there. I was for television. A guy named Steve Dykes, who had worked for Cleveland as his press secretary, was the radio reporter on the scene when the victim of the murders was found. Teresa's last name is escaping me now, but a young woman who was raped, murdered, and dismembered. Her body was found, and Steve was with the sheriff when that occurred. And then a print reporter for the community where she came from, and they still kind of use that methodology in the Department of Corrections. So we're walking out, Steve and I are conversing, and I see the young lady who I'd gone to journalism school with looking very faint, and it was a jarring experience. And when we hit that smell, she lost all the coloring in her face. It was very clear she was in distress, and as I started to turn to help her, she was getting ready to vomit. And I saw it coming and turned sideways as Steve Dykes was telling me about this job in the Secretary of State's office that he was vacating, and she blew chunks all over his pinstripe Matlock suit and turned back to me to say, I'm not sure I should be telling you about this anymore, but I'll still put in a word for you with Cleveland. So I had known him at Georgia. He was a couple of years older than me. He moved to Kansas City, Missouri, and went to work for Sprint. He's back in Atlanta now. We're still friends. But he did put in a word for me, and I was then 25 and working in making television, and there were much more seasoned journalists and people who applied for that job. I really did not expect to get asked back for the second interview. Don McClellan, who was forever a talent at WSB Television in Atlanta, had applied. The House Information Office, Warren Rary, director, who later went on to be a peer of mine in the Secretary of State's office in another capacity, had applied. But for whatever series of reasons, Cleveland, when he called me back in the second interview, said he wanted someone who understood television because he thought that's where politics, communications-wise, was moving, and that was young because he was planning to be in public service for a while, and he wanted to take somebody with him along the way. So they offered me the position. I took it, and I spent 5 years working for him. Then I was invited to join Zell Miller's administration when he became governor. And then while serving in the Miller administration, I got a phone call from Washington, and Paul Coverdell, who was the U.S. Peace Corps director, who was contemplating coming back to Georgia to have a challenge against then Democratic incumbent U.S. Senator Weish Fowler. And that opportunity, I knew Paul from before, afforded me the opportunity to kind of help build out Georgia's two-party infrastructure. I didn't care for Senator Fowler and be involved in a statewide Senate campaign. So I took that. We won 4 elections, three out of 4 elections, but the runoff was the one that mattered at the end in 6 months. And Paul became the junior senator from Georgia in January of 1993. And I worked for him for a couple of years, helped his transition and set up in Washington, but stayed here because my marriage was collapsing and my first child was born, and went to work for the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce. Was there until 97 when a phone call came from Mike Bowers for my last statewide campaign attempt, and I worked for the Bowers for Governor campaign through its unsuccessful run in a primary runoff against Guy Milner, and then went into communications more in the corporate and nonprofit setting first for the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce during the Olympic years, and ended up in the agency business from 1999 to now.
All right. Before we get into some of the Chamber of Commerce work and then eventually leading to setting up your own shop, the comment I want to make, which I think is why you make for such a good political analyst, is you have worked on both sides of the aisle and you have a good sense of the history of the two-party system. You're not just a partisan hack, as a lot of people might want to call somebody in politics today. You understand the business of getting elected, whether it's Democrat or Republican.
I also think one of the reasons I've lasted as long as I have is that I've always put the individual, the candidate or the office holder, and their beliefs or whatever messages they're trying to communicate first and party second. And I'm not suggesting that we don't need strong parties in the Republican, Democratic, and third parties if we ever get them. But I've never been a partisan loyalist or someone who got bent over the discussions and dialogue and debate over platforms at the plank at conventions. Voters elect people. Parties support people and candidates and have platforms and ideas, and they do matter. You have to have structure. But one of the reasons I've worked on both sides of the aisle is I've always supported the person that I was working for and whatever their specific, not say I agreed with everything they ever said or did, but the particular agenda or focus that they were trying to bring to the office they were seeking or holding.
All right, well, let's move into then, because I'm gonna circle back around to some of your politics, and so will Walt, without going necessarily too political. As we mentioned before we even started the podcast, we wanted to get more of a snapshot of who you are for the audience. You did get a chance to work with a local chamber of commerce, which gives you sort of another view of economic development before it even led to your own private sector business. So can you talk a little bit about your experience with the chamber?
Sure. When I was leaving Senator Coverdell's staff, I had a close friend, Charles Van Rysselberg, who was one of the executive vice presidents of the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce. Then, I'm not sure if now, it was the largest by membership Chamber of Commerce in the country. Our headquarters were in downtown Atlanta, and we were heading into the window that would become the Metro Atlanta, the Centennial Olympic Games hosted in Metro Atlanta in Georgia in 1996. So it was a unique opportunity, and I ran something called Forward Atlanta, which is the marketing economic development arm of the chamber. We had television spots we produced that ran globally on CNN International. We had multi-language collateral materials we produced for various international foreign direct investment markets. We did both response marketing, which means the company lead contacts us and asks for information, and target marketing, where we're specifically going after either an industry sector or a company. We were very successful in both of the latter of those. And during the 94 Super Bowl, we had a number of target companies in and hosted them out at what is now the King and Queen complex in Sandy Springs Concourse, put them in those hotels and let them see those buildings as they were coming up. And I'm proud to say that I think of the 14 companies that we were directly hosting, 8 of them located projects here or global headquarters here or North American headquarters here within a year of that Super Bowl weekend.
That's a lot of people don't realize how important a chamber of commerce is to economic development, both on the small business side, but also on the recruiting of business. A strong chamber really does make for a robust local economy.
And we had some very strong partners. So I wouldn't suggest we did that by ourselves, but working with the Georgia Department of Economic Development, the local economic development entities of those counties. Georgia is a very business-friendly state, so it's not unusual to work with the Georgia General Assembly if the project is big enough. During those windows, we relocated UPS from Connecticut. We relocated Intercontinental Hotels, which was then Holiday Inn International, out of Memphis, Tennessee, to here. We relocated the digital imaging division of Kodak, which at the time everybody's going digital imaging, hardy har har. Everybody's going to be shooting film forever, where we know how that ended up. And some of the automotive sector stuff we were doing at the time, we were locating suppliers. So Siemens Energy and Automation, and a lot of these suppliers to the major automotive divisions that make, the little engine that makes the window in your car go up and down. We were trying to locate the suppliers here first because we knew a lot of those large factories, whether it was BMW, Mercedes, later Kia, were going to want to locate with their suppliers nearby. So they were looking at the South favorably because a lot of the German and Japanese and Korean suppliers had already been located here by us. So some of the manufacturing siding of the automotive plants came as a result of where was the confluence of their suppliers.
So, Bill, you have seen, you basically have seen a Georgia history over the last 20, 30 years through your career. And when you look at Georgia in the South, how has it changed from your perspective, and how has it stayed the same? Has it kept its identity?
Southern accents are getting harder to come by.
Yeah.
I'm a product of a mixed marriage. Dad's family's a bunch of Yankees from upstate New York, and Mom is from Birmingham, Alabama. But the majority of Dad's father has since relocated here. There's some Yankee cousins that have stayed in upstate New York, but the majority of them have all come down this way. I'll use a couple of specific geographies as microcosms because I've been in Georgia. I've left and lived in other places, but the concentration of my life has been here. So Forsyth County, in 1988, I joined my father, though neither of us knew the other was going, and we were among those who marched with Hosea Williams, the second march going into Forsyth, the simple statement of which was to tell the people of Forsyth County that they needed to not be so hostile towards minority members becoming residents of their community. And this was in the early and mid-1980s. You could drive around anywhere off of Georgia 400 more than a couple of miles then, and I'd literally drive up on signs that said, and pardon listeners, but this is what the sign said, "Don't let the sun set on your black ass." And so I among several thousand people who went up there to follow Reverend Williams and the march, got pelted with rocks and broken bottles by primarily teenagers and some white supremacists, but some residents of that county. And the law enforcement community of the state protected the protesters, but you could tell the sheriff's deputies and the police officers in the city of Cumming were not thrilled to have us there. There were several threats of violence in large scale against the protesters. Jump ahead now 30 years after that, and you drive off Georgia 400 and any exit off of 400 going towards Lake Lanier in the other direction. It's a very diverse county. It has one of the highest performing school districts in the state. Some of the most affluent housing outside of the 5 core metro area are on Lake Lanier in Forsyth County. That county is just but one of the bedroom communities that literally has exploded and changed and dynamically in the last 30 years. The core city and the core metro counties exploded also during the Olympic years, but then had some pretty significant drop-off during the last recession and seem to be really hitting their stride again in the last 3 to 5 years. And the combination of COVID-19 and the more recent racial justice protests, have sort of put the inner core city of Atlanta back on its heels. I think we're possibly going to see white flight again out of the inner city. I know we're seeing businesses getting nervous, and I would point to Time Warner's announcement that CNN is relocating out of CNN Center as the most visible case in point. Outstate, Cartersville, y'all's area, I remember when the brewery got built. I remember when Plant Bowen was the largest coal burning plant in the southeastern United States, and when they spent more on the scrubbers to clean the emissions of those smokestacks than they did on Plant Bowen itself. Your area and the Tellus Museum is also along the 75 corridor exploded. And I think what we've seen in large scale in the last 30 years is, for all the talk we had in the 80s of the benefits of what they called the developmental highway system, whether we're talking about the widening of I-75, the 575 corridor, the Blue Ridge Parkway up Georgia 400, if you put the roads connecting places people actually do want to go to, they will be developmental highways. But you can't use the roads alone to cause people to make investments.
No, you're absolutely right. Living here in the northwest corner of the state of Georgia, which now is basically an outer suburb of Atlanta Metro. Let's face it, almost everybody in the northwest and south, pretty much like a 50-mile radius outside of Atlanta will still say, I live in Atlanta. We all want to be recognized as being part of Hotlanta. I think one of the things I noticed when I moved here in the mid-'80s with the explosion of Dobbins Air Force Base, a lot of people relocating from lost jobs up north during the 84, 85, 86 timeframe, I think that really helped give Georgia the start of what we're seeing today. A lot of influx of not just talent and skill, but with the Olympics and with the development we've seen, we've got a pretty good infrastructure in place for technology. It's not just blue-collar manufacturing, which we have plenty of, but it's a lot of the white-collar and it's a lot of the IT kind of companies that move to Georgia, which I think is why Georgia's still one of the friendliest places to do business.
And until Sam Nunn retired from the Senate in 1996, he also understood that. So whether we're talking about the facilities at Fort Gordon in Augusta or the avionics mission at Robins Air Force Base or all of the things that Lockheed and the U.S. Air Force have invested at Dobbins, they understood the long-term job gain and the technology community build out. And the Southern senators weren't just pro-military. They were pushing those investments to be made in their states for economic development and long-term job growth.
All right, let's move the discussion now to you launching your own PR firm, CSI Crane, in 2009. So you were involved sort of in the public sector. You sort of were straddling that fence when you were working with Chamber of Commerce between public-private. But now you're going off on your own. You're doing your own thing. What made you decide to start your own PR firm?
My second child was born in the spring of, July 1st, but we were pregnant and knew she was coming in the spring of 2007. And we became aware before Olivia arrived that she had Down syndrome. So when she got here, there were some medical complications that were not insignificant. She's a very healthy child now, very happy, getting ready to start middle school this fall. But at the time, we were making some not short-term and regular visits to the hospital. We were going to have heart surgery. Her mom, it just wasn't fair. The company I was working for was very good to me, but I was on the road 4, sometimes 5 days a week, mostly domestic travel, but some international. Right after Olivia was born, I kept asking them, I love the work here, but could we start sending somebody else on a lot of these crisis assignments, or could I train some of the staff to be the person who parachutes in? And they'd say, sure, we completely get it. We're behind you on the family stuff, but could you go to Baltimore in the morning? And I'd go to and I'd come back from Baltimore, and it'd be the next week, and could you go to Dallas? And so I understood the business rationale, and I was good at what I was doing. That business case wasn't going to change. So we had a very cordial series of conversations. I left them in late 2008 and wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do. I attempted work with another colleague, Quinn Hudson, who is now the communications director for the DeKalb County government, kind of as a two-person shop with he and I as partners called Hudson Crane. And without going into too much detail, I'll just say it wasn't a good fit. So I decided in the early spring of 2009, I was just going to take the crapshoot of renting out a space and hanging out a shingle and opening my own shop. And I had a few clients who'd followed me out the door from GCI Group, which was where I had been for a decade. GCI being a division of Gray Communications, a large, then New York-based advertising and marketing firm. So I was trying to come up with a name. And of course, you've all, and I'm sure your listening audience have heard of the CSI TV shows, Crime Scene Investigation. Mm-hmm. My former employer, GCI Group, started in New York and then came to Atlanta in the year of that Super Bowl I spoke of earlier in January of 1994, set up shop as Gray Communications International. They were going to be the PR division of the existing ad agency. Well, there's a Gray Communications International in Albany, Georgia, and they spell it Gray. They now own the Gwinnett Daily Citizen and a bunch of other properties. They were a smaller company then, but they'd been here first and since the 1950s. They sued us for use of name and copyright and trademark infringement and won. And so we had to immediately and overnight change the name of our company to GCI Group. And it always made me laugh. We would be paid quite a lot of money by a lot of brand name companies you would recognize to do branding, to do messaging, and always talked about the importance of words and name, word choice. And they'd say, what does GCI Group stand for? And we had to say nothing. So I decided that I had to have something that stood for something. So CSI Crane actually stands for Communications, Strategy, and Intelligence. And I know, Alan, you've seen my logo, but it's an old kind of style typewriter. And I can always tell when I'm doing a pitch or when I'm brought in to meet a new client, kind of the generational break in the room, because almost every millennial will look at that typewriter and say on the card, what the hell is that? Standard answer has become, that's the laptop before we had electricity.
Yeah.
So most of the clients who hire me have enough gray hair and gray matter that they understand what a typewriter is. And what I'm speaking to there is the importance of the word and the message in whatever medium. It doesn't matter. Online, billboard, television, thought leadership, crisis management. It all comes back to what are you trying to say and who are you trying to say it to? And so the positioning that I came out of the gate with initially was to go into highly regulated industries like utilities, like healthcare, and supporting consultative practices like particularly their lawyers, who oftentimes were helping them deal with crises, and go after those specific assignments because they tended to be lucrative, and it tended to be when your house is on fire or your ass is in a crack, CEOs tend to actually listen. They actually take counsel. That's how I met the president. He wasn't president then, but we were doing some work in a crisis management mode for his contractor, his construction firm, Bovis Lend Lease, on the construction of Trump World Plaza across from the United Nations. So it afforded a lot of really cool opportunities, and we built a nice little shop over the 11, almost 12 years now. We are based in Decatur. We have a team of 5 and several contractors. We just expanded the office. I took in another senior practitioner in the last month. And I hate to brag because it's been such a crappy time of year for everybody else, but COVID-19 has been very good to CSI Crane.
Well, hey, congratulations to you then.
None of us have gotten ill, and we've had one of our best quarters coming out of the second quarter to going into the third in the last 5 years.
All right. We are kind of almost caught up to current time as far as your private sector business and what you're doing with CSI Crane. But in the meantime, you have also become a pretty stalwart voice for WSB, both TV and radio. Folks who listen to the podcast know that I have an affiliation with WSB as a part-time fill-in. When they need me, I come running. Talk a little bit about what it's like to be involved now in providing analysis, because your voice and your opinions are being given a lot of weight in the Atlanta metro, which is a huge market.
Well, thank you, Alan. I think some of that has to do just simply with longevity. But I was working at WXIA, and my role there was largely election nights and every Sunday morning at 8:30 in the morning, and a little bit during the legislative session. And that was from July of 2000 through the election cycle prior to the 2012 presidential election. And Channel 11, I still have a lot of friends there. Their lead anchor is a very close friend of mine. I've known Jeff probably since he was here with Fox 5, gosh, back in the 80s. But there were limits to what they wanted to do with politics and the value they saw in that space. So I was working for GCI Group in a building literally across the street when I started working for Channel 11, which you would now know is the Dewberry building that has the restaurant on the corner across the street from the TV station, that tall glass building. Smaller than they added a tower. So there's 2 buildings and a parking garage in the middle. I was in that shorter building across the street. So long about 2000, one of my clients was Aflac, and Dan Amos was really serious about spending money and building a brand around pediatric cancer care. And so he gifted $5 million to Children's Healthcare of Atlanta to rename and develop and expand the first Aflac Cancer Center, which was at Children's Healthcare Atlanta's Eggleston camp. And he gave us the assignment, being the agency, to not only work with the Aflac Duck people, but to make this a philanthropic cause of note in North Georgia. And at the same time, WSB Radio, through my friend Scott Slade, and you know Scott, the other air talent had been missioned by Pete Spriggs to pick a big charitable cause that the 70,000 watt blowtorch would own, that they would kind of adopt and make their own, also known to their audience. And I'm not so proud that I don't steal good ideas from other places. So I happened to be in New York, and I saw Don Imus of WABC in New York hosting a telethon on his radio station on the air for 36 hours and raised several $1 million for a children's hospital that's prominent in New York State. So I came back and told Dan Amos about Don Imus, and then coincidentally, Don Imus has Dan Amos on his show. So I asked them if they'll let me go to WSB Radio and pitch this. They did. And initially, it's hard to believe, the hospital was going to say no. The hospital thought
What?
radio was not the way to go, and they already had the Children's Miracle Network telethon with Donnie and Marie Osmond, and they didn't need to further splinter their fundraising efforts. And Diane Von Braun, who's a dear friend from college, who was number 2 at the Choa Foundation at the time, I said, Diane, listen to me. I'm telling you, this talk radio station has a relationship with its listeners that is not common, that is decades long. These people will respond, and you'll be pulling in well over $1 million a year off of 3 days that you don't even have to do that much. They didn't believe me, but they did say yes. And so now we are 20 years later, and that event has raised over $27 million for pediatric cancer and resulted in substantial expansions at 3 campuses, Scottish Rite, Eggleston, and Hughes Spalding, and we'll be involved heavily in relocating all of that to a centralized campus, the new Choa campus in Brookhaven. But that sort of introduced me to the management at Cox Media Group and people like Pete Spriggs, and Scott kept nudging them. And in 2006, they took me to lunch and said, we'd like you to come do on radio in longer form what you're doing on Channel 11 on Sunday mornings if it's not a conflict for Gannett. And Gannett wasn't paying me. So it wasn't real hard for me to say to them, I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
And then that sort of evolved. And then in 2011, at the end of the year, I was preceded at Channel 11 by Matt Towers, who then left and went to work for Channel 2. And I won't get into why, but he then left Channel 2 to go to Fox 5. And when he did that, creating an opening in front of that 2012 presidential election, I got a phone call from Mike Dredden, who was then the news director, asked me to come do what they call the chemistry read with Monica Kaufman Pearson, who I had known since I was 13 years old, and Justin Farmer, and then Justin Farmer and Javita Moore. Those were their 3 primary anchors. And the backup then, John Bachman has gone down to Jacksonville and is doing very well down there. But I did, and I guess those went well because Merle Black was my competition, the senior political scientist at Emory University. And they offered me the gig, and they do pay me. And I joined the WSB-TV Action News team in November of 2011 and have been there since. And on radio, my role initially was once a week on Monday mornings chatting politics with Scott Slade. But different things happened, like Herman Cain took a liking to me and then had a nighttime show. And Jamie Dupree, who we all know, had a very long schedule with the much larger Cox Media Group then that started at 5 or 6 a.m. East Coast time, and depending on the day, could carry him to doing segments on the 6 o'clock news in San Diego, which then was still a Cox market, all across the day parts, feeding content about Washington, D.C. And by the time Herman's show came on from 8 to 10 p.m., Jamie was a bit of a tired puppy. So I got asked to come on and do segments once a week with Herman called Cane and Crane, Food for Your Brain. And
yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, I do too.
I started doing my column, my print column, that started in a situation not like this, just shooting the breeze with some newspaper publishers at the Georgia Publishers, at the Georgia Press Association's awards banquet down on Jekyll Island. And I was telling a lot of stories about my grandfather, who was a newspaper publisher and who published a column called One Man's Opinion. And then my current publisher of my hometown newspaper, Carolyn Glenn, said, you ought to write a column. And I said, I'll write a column, but somebody's got to pay me to write a column. She said, I'll pay you. So that's how the column got started. And we're now at about 40 publications around the state. So a lot of it, I'm sure it maybe looks like on the outside all this came together with a grand plan, but most of it honestly was by accident or just being in the right place at the right time.
Well, isn't a lot of what happens in life having the skills waiting for somebody to take and say, hey, can I get you to do X? And then next thing you know, something breaks loose. I mean, you do have to be ready. You do have to be ready to respond. And I call them happy because I'm a great believer in luck and good fortune. That's what propels me back to Las Vegas at least once a year, is that my good luck tends to outrun my bad luck. or you go to Vegas to remind yourself that all your good luck is actually back here where you're employed. So
true, and go spend some lost wages and then bounce back.
Right.
My last trip was right before COVID. It was to say goodbye to the Hard Rock Hotel Casino in January of this year, right before they closed it down and rebranded it, and of course right before I knew COVID-19 was real when I was with you and Chris Chambers at the station doing the last Democratic debate between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. And in the middle of that evening and newscast, watching the governor of Las Vegas and the mayor of Las Vegas come on what looked like the basement of an airport and declare that they were closing down the Las Vegas Strip. I knew it was real.
Yeah, it was a pretty stark moment when you realize Vegas is going to shut down basically what Vegas is known for?
Well, the economy of the entire state, other than the federal government and the testing site where we still have, underground nuclear weapons waste is buried. That's been closed. We still do weapons testing. There's, 2/3, I think, of Nevada is still owned by the federal government. But gaming is the industry of the state. And, it's creeping back to existence now in both Reno and Las Vegas. I don't know that it'll ever be what it used to be.
All right. Well, we are rapidly running out of our interview segment time. I know you're actually busy as we're recording this. There's some runoffs and things going on. I'm not going to necessarily go into predictions, but what Walt and I kind of want to maybe bounce to the whole Herman Cain, rapid fire.
Okay.
Give you a chance to give us a couple of your interesting anecdotes. You've been doing that along the way anyway. I'm going to kick it over to Walt and see, because I know he's been sitting there, and I know he is a longtime listener of WSB, and I know this has got to be something really cool to be able to have you on the air with us for him.
Yeah, and Bill, one of the things that I've always wondered and wanted to ask you, who do you vote for? I'm kidding. Because I will credit you, I could never figure out what your affiliation is. You have never played your hand on that.
I vote for candidates in both parties. I voted for the last time we had a presidential election. I voted for the Libertarian, Gary Johnson, and his running mate, William Weld, who were both formerly governors as Republicans, certainly center-left Republicans, but Gary Johnson of New Mexico for 2 terms and William Weld for 2 terms, though he didn't finish his second term, in Massachusetts. Both of them elected in states that are typically not considered Republican. In William Weld's case, he preceded Mitt Romney. He was reelected by nearly 70%. So, and they had good records while they were governors of those respective states. Having worked both sides of the aisle and living in a county, DeKalb, where there virtually is no Republican Party other than in the Dunwoody kind of northwest corridor of the county, I've got friends on both sides. But I will say I tend to lean right of center. I'm conservative on fiscal issues. I'm pretty much libertarian on social issues. But we've had in Georgia some very solid Democrats, as recently as now in certain parts of the state. I don't agree with a lot of the national Democratic Party's focus and its idea basically that everything should be free and the federal government should control every aspect of your life. But not every Democrat actually does think that way. And though we have seen such polarization, or tribalism, I guess I'd like to call it, in the last 5 to 7 years, I still believe the right people leading these parties, or even third-party candidates, can help us eventually start thinking as one nation again. It really concerns me, and social media has contributed to this, when dialogue gets so heated so quickly. I've had, you say you don't read me in favor of one party or another. I've had high school and college classmates who I've known 30 and 40 years in this last year on my Facebook feed say things like, fake news, communist much, when did you become such a leftist pinko? And I honestly, I think if anything, I lean slightly right, but I try to play it down the middle. And I'm hard, if you will, critiquing candidates and officials in both parties, because I think they both have a long way to go to serve American people.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is you have always been objective. And I've always seen you kind of call the balls and strikes as you see them, and never really let a politician off the hook no matter what side they're on. And that's one thing I've always appreciated about your coverage.
Well, I thank you very much for that. That's the attempt. I always think I must be doing something right when either party accuses me of being a spy on the other party.
Well done, sir.
Well, Bill, do you see, as we move forward into this really heated election time, the media gets beat up a lot, probably rightly so. Do you see the media kind of backing out of those partisan arguments, or do you see the people in the media digging their heels in on their political ideals more and more as we get closer to the election?
Again, coming from this small-town newspaper family background, I make a pretty big distinction between local market media and what I'll call the national legacy media outlets. So I think if you were to talk to, say, Brian Kemp, the governor of Georgia today, and you were to ask him about the media that most often covers him in Georgia, even the Atlanta Journal and Constitution, and they butt heads, even all of the harder reporters at channels 2, 5, 11, and 46, he would tell you at least they give him the opportunity to tell his side or answer a question without prejudging him. When you look at Brian Kemp through the prism of the New York Times, Washington Post, I was reading an article in Vanity Fair. I'm not making this up last week. It was a kind of a political chart where they do the, cut art, clip art of different things and saying what this politician reminds them of or looks like, whatever. They had Brian Kemp and an Idaho spud potato.
Wow. Oh.
And I just get sick. And I would feel that as angry, I think, if that were Stacey Abrams. But I get so sick of hearing and reading every time I pick up the New York Times or the Washington Post references to Brian Kemp stealing our last election. That did not happen. Or the voter suppression that is rampant in the state. And I'll say this to your audience and hope I don't offend them. If there is a Republican in Georgia or in the Secretary of State's office who is in charge of minority voter suppression, he or she really sucks at their job. We've had
they do.
Record minority registration, record minority turnout, record absentee ballots cast, record new registration, record over the percentage of the population they hold. All of this has happened with Republican leadership at the state level and a Republican Secretary of State too, in fact. So where's the suppression?
Right. Shifting gears, less serious. We want to end on a fun note. Name some of the, like you mentioned, ironically, the president well before he ever ran, but name some folks that you have run across or may even consider friends now as a result of all the years you've done PR, some of the cool names you've run across.
Stars first, and then we'll kind of get to people that I actually have more interaction with and kind of have developed a friendship. The most probably top, Burt Reynolds and Roger Moore were two male leads that I was both fascinated with their careers and had a chance to meet. Bruce Willis. On the female side, I was more than tongue-tied. I can't say some of the things I felt, but when I met Farrah Fawcett, still at the peak of her time on this planet. Linda Carter, when I was representing Democratic Secretary of State Max Cleland. This is an anecdote I think you'll enjoy. I'm standing in line at the Democratic National Convention to see Lloyd Benson named the vice presidential running mate for Michael Dukakis. We knew who the person was. I'd never met Senator Benson. And you're in those lines that you often get in long political events that are divided by alphabet. And my name is an A through C name, Crane. And that the front of the alphabet always seems to be the longer line. So two people directly in front of me are Linda Carter, who was then Wonder Woman, and her husband, David Altman, who was a banker who would later go to prison, and then me, and then Ed Begley Jr., the actor from St. Elsewhere. And then behind Ed Begley Jr. were two little old ladies. And they were vaguely familiar. I didn't know where I knew them from, but I knew them. And they were chattering, and one of them had a scarf on her head and looked very frail and looked like she might faint. So I'm Southern. I walked over to the two of them, stepped back in line, let Mr. Begley Jr. go in front of me, because it's a long line anyway, and said, ladies, can I get you some water or a chair? Is there anything? And of the two, the other lady reaches her hand out and says, hi, I'm Ann Cox Chambers.
Wow.
This is my sister, Barbara Cox Anthony. So that week earlier, like 2 days before, the Cox Family Foundation had given the DNC $100,000, which in 1988 was a lot of political.
That's a lot of money, yeah.
So I said, ladies, I'm going to go up front of the line and let them know who you are and get everything taken care of. I'll be right back. So I go up and I tell them, and immediately two people, functionaries, come and get the Cox sisters, and they disappear. And so I wait, and then you go into this big ballroom, and it's sort of divided by the gold stanchioned rope. And on that side is the stage and the champagne and Governor Benson or Governor Dukakis, and you could see Senator Benson in the distance. And on my side was the cheese doodles and the chips. And then, as I'm getting ready to see if I'm even going to be able to get a free beer out of getting into this room, two guys come over to me looking like Secret Service, and they said, come with me. And I thought the jig was up because I was actually there on Max Cleland's invitation, that they had, kind of cross-referenced the list. And of course, this was 1988, but that I was going to be thrown out of the ballroom. But they take me out the door of the ballroom into the kitchen corridor, and I literally thought they were going to take me out, throw me out of the hotel. But they marched me around the far side of the ballroom, and I come in on the other side, and there are the Cox sisters sitting together, and they take me over to them. And Miss Chambers says, "It has been a long time since either of us have experienced a true Southern gentleman. We would love you to stay as our guest." And
wow,
that is awesome.
Sat me down with the Cox sisters and had myself a glass of champagne and watched Lloyd Bentsen become the nominee for the Democratic Party, or not his speech, but when he was announced as the Democratic Party. So,
did you wave at Max Cleveland way at the back?
He wasn't there. He did blank receptions, and he wasn't opposed to Bentsen, but he had another pick that he had in mind, specifically Al Gore, for that nod, who was a friend of his who later became vice president. So he wasn't there that night. But I did. That was a great party week. It was surpassed by the Centennial Olympic Games, but that was a great time. During the Centennial Olympic Games, one of my favorite, this was not politics as much as working economic development, but MSNBC, the network, launched from the rooftop of the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce during the 3 weeks of those games. And so on day one, they had a pretty star-studded pack list of guests, some of which had great names in sports, like Muhammad Ali was on, and I got to not speak with him, but see him kind of at a slight distance. But I got to squire around Larry Hagman of Dallas fame. And he was there as the official pitch man of a bid for Dallas and Houston to host a future Olympiad. And they had JR as their spokesman. And he had just had his liver replacement surgery, so he was teetotaling. But he was a lot of fun to be around, handing out those $100 bills with his own face on it. And, it was just a fun day. I met the Magnificent Seven, the women's gymnastics team that won the gold, their coach, Bella Caroli. I met the men's basketball team that won the gold, which was largely comprised of the Chicago Bulls at that time. But, Magic Johnson and I'm blanking. I can see him doing his Nike swoosh jump in the air.
Michael Jordan,
and the team all during that week. We had the Olympic Hospitality Village immediately behind us, and I invented a drink called Izzy's Blood, which was Powerade Blue and champagne that later became the official drink of the King and Queen of Sweden during the games.
That's awesome.
Wow.
I was introduced to one of the handmaidens, and they still had those back then, for the princess. And so I introduced her to that as a substitute for a mimosa. And she, because their colors are blue and white, the national colors of Sweden. So she introduced that drink. And so 2 days later, I come back into the suite, and they're all having brunch, and they're all drinking Izzy's Blood for.
What a name!
That is awesome.
It stuck for a little bit. I'm trying to think of some of the bad experiences and the jerks. And I've met a lot of politicians. I've had the occasion to meet every president from Carter forward, and they all have personas. But what is in most of those cases, I've been around them enough to see the persona and the real person. And a lot of times there's a disconnect. What you think of publicly knowing that president. But of all of them, my favorite is probably George W. Bush, with his father being a close second. Reagan was very charming to watch, but when you flip the light switch off and when he wasn't in front of an audience or a camera, I saw him after the attempt on his life in the shooting, and I'm told by those who were close to him, he was diminished. And so I did not meet him before that. But Clinton is a fun guy to have a beer with, and I have. The vice president, Al Gore, can be a fun guy. I got to meet him with Cleveland again, and you tell me what I'm doing with the clock here, but it's 1988, and it's that Democratic convention year. Al Gore is the favorite son candidate that Super Tuesday is supposed to nominate, and we are introducing him to Georgia elections officials at the Hyatt Regency Hotel in Atlanta, and I'm just sort of squiring a pack of reporters that are following him in Cleveland around a room of about 600 local election superintendents and officials. And Al Gore walks up to the Chatham County Savannah delegation, and he's shaking hands and saying, "Hi, I'm Al Gore. I'm running for president. Hi, I'm Al Gore. I'm running for president. Hi, I'm Al Gore. I'm running for president." And he gets to the end of this little half circle of people, and the chairman of the Chatham County Election Board was an older lady named Chappie Davis. And Chappie Davis, he shakes her hand and says, "Hi, I'm Al Gore. I'm running for president." And she says, "The president of what?" And he says, "The United States." And she says, "You're kidding." Well, CNN had a camera in that pack, and so on Inside Politics, Gene Randall, who's the anchor at the time, opens the show that night with, "It appears Al Gore has a problem with name identification in his native South." They go to this clip. So lots of fun anecdotes. I got to meet Batman, Adam West, and Burt Ward at the state capitol doing the Atlanta World of Wheels show. He did become a friend and somebody I corresponded with until he passed a little more than a year ago. It's been a wild ride, apropos to the show that you're having me as a guest on today.
This is perfect. We have allowed you to go longer than almost any of our guests because I don't even know if we've scratched the surface, and that's why it was an honor and a privilege when you said you would be a guest on our show, and I really appreciate you taking time to do that.
Well, I'd be happy to come back, and I'd let y'all talk more.
Well, that's not what this show's about. So we really enjoyed it, Bill. And I again, I've been a fan, and I really appreciate you taking the time to join us and to give us a little bit of your history. I really
Well, thanks, guys. I hope your listeners enjoy it, and keep in touch.
All right, go hydrate. I know you got to get ready for a TV gig here in about 30 minutes or so. So we'll let you go. If you'll hang up, we have to still do the other segments of our show, but you go ahead and drop off. And Bill, thank you so much. Hopefully we won't be strangers much longer if we can get COVID under control enough to let me get back down there. And I don't know if you've even been back down there, but I miss having segments with you.
Well, hopefully we'll see each other before the November election. Take care.
See you, Bill. All right.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Yeah, appreciate it.
All right, we had to let Bill go. He wasn't going to be able, we knew ahead of time, he wasn't going to be able to join us for our news segment. But now it's time for us to get to the back half of the show here. We've got the guest duties out of the way. Let's talk about some crazy news.
It's no bullshit.
Walt, what do you got?
Well, I'm finding it harder and harder to find crazy news, but I guess these two will do. We'll start with an article from The Smoking Gun, and you'll love the headline. Man jailed for alleged felony Slurpee battery.
Okay.
See, I told you it was tough to find anything good.
Now, wait a minute. Do we need to describe that in the North, we call them Slurpees. In the South, they call them slushies.
Yeah, and see, what's funny about that? Well, it is at a 7-Eleven. Or Ices, yeah. Well, it comes from a 7-Eleven, but it's in Florida, so our favorite place to go, so it's a Slurpee. Yeah. So a Florida man was jailed yesterday, which was August 7th, on a felony Slurpee battery charge, records show. Investigators allege that Brian Duffy, 40, last month doused a 7-Eleven employee with the frozen treat during a 9:20 a.m. argument about the drink's price inside a store in Pinellas Park. According to an assault affidavit, a surveillance camera recorded Duffy backhanding the cup full of a Slurpee drink out of the female victim's hand. The Slurpee flew onto the victim's person, a cop reported. While Duffy left 7-Eleven before police responded, the victims yesterday afternoon pointed the defendant out to law enforcement, apparently after he returned to the convenience store. Dummy. During police questioning, Duffy recalled there previously was an incident in which he was being charged too much for a drink, but Duffy did not recall knocking the Slurpee out of the worker's hands. Since Duffy's lengthy rap sheet included a prior battery conviction, he was charged with a felony for the July 26th incident. Duffy, and folks, y'all got to look this up because he's pictured at left, is being held in the county jail in lieu of $2,500 bail. He has been ordered by a judge to have no contact with the victim, and he must stay away from the 7-Eleven where the confrontation occurred.
It's no bullshit.
Yeah, let that short temper can get the better of you.
Yeah, and I'm holding up for your enjoyment the picture of this moron. So, so that's our 7-Eleven Slurpee dipshit of the week.
All right. So while we're on the subject of morons, boy, do I have a pair for you. So I'll give you the headline. Although I don't know, maybe it'll give away too much of the story, but I'll give you the headline anyway. Plane overloaded with Coke crashes even before it takes off.
Awesome.
Now, we're not talking soda. I know here in Atlanta, everything's a Coke, but we're not talking Coca-Cola.
Well, I was going to ask you if it was Sprite or root beer.
Yeah, nope. Now, look, you'd think someone who's used to smuggling drugs from one place to another, one country to another, would check to make sure of the weight and placement of the shipment within their little plane here. They're taking one of those little Cessna-style planes, underbody wing planes. But no, not in this case. In this case, they're going to be paying a price for their lack of paying attention. A smaller plane so packed full of coke, it couldn't even get off the ground.
Ugh.
The plane tried leaving Papua New Guinea and was meant for Queensland, Australia, never getting there. The plane was reported to be carrying $80 million worth of the drug, weighing in at 500 kilograms.
Oh, my
500
gosh.
kilograms, dude.
Don't you think that they would care more about their investment and take better? That is mind-blowing.
That is mind-blowing. I mean, normally these little small planes, they factor in 2 people, the fuel in the wings, and then maybe a couple of bags of luggage. So they were well over the weight of this plane. It could not even get airborne. According to police, the plane had already flown illegally into the country at a low height to stay under radar. The Australian Federal Police said that it alleges greed, you think, played a significant part in the syndicate's activities and cannot rule out that the weight of the cocaine had an impact on the plane's ability to take off. The Royal Papua New Guinea Constabulary have seized the consignment, according to local police. There were 5 men charged with multiple charges for trying to import the drugs, and they may be looking at life in prison. So,
ooh.
There you go. Packing a plane with 500 kilograms of cocaine. Can't even get off the ground.
It's no bullshit.
Man, and you'd think that if they're dealing with that much stuff, that they've done this before and it would have a little bit better sense of how much they can get in there.
Yeah. Where I live, this didn't happen that long ago in one of the municipalities. A plane was really overloaded and it was struggling, and so they didn't calculate the gas mileage correctly, and it was about 5 miles short of the runway when it ran out of gas. And as they were trying to land in a field, they clipped a wire and they ended up crashing in a field. But because they were coming in so low and slow, both men survived, and they begged police, don't ever, ever, ever let us out of jail, because that plane was full of money. It was about $500,000 in small marked wrap bills that was the money from a drug deal that they were coming back. They wanted to fly south of the border with it and ended up running out of gas coming back. Because they were just overloaded with luggage and just all of the payout money. So, yeah, it did not bode well for them.
That's not smart. Don't run out of fuel.
No. Plus, if your job is to run drugs and or run the money back, you better make sure you're both delivering and returning, because you're not going to be seen or heard from again if they let you out.
Dude, it's the smuggler's blues.
Smuggler's blues, man. Insert a little Glenn Fry there.
There you go. So, all right, well, I've got another cheery story. This one coming from NJ.com. Rampaging New Jersey man injures 4 as he stole vehicles, caused 2 crashes, sexually assaulted a woman, and fought the police. So this comes from Glassboro. A Glassboro man allegedly caused 2 auto accidents as he tried to sexually assault a woman in a rampage that left several people injured, including a police officer, according to authorities. The incident began Friday morning when Andrew M. Talbert, 23, old enough to know better, kicked several individuals out of his family home, according to an affidavit. He then allegedly walked to a neighbor's house, stole a Ford pickup truck, and drove the wrong way down State Street.
Oops.
Yep, bad start. Triggering an accident involving 2 other vehicles. One of the other vehicles, a Honda Pilot, overturned, trapping the injured driver inside. As others ran to assist, Talbert allegedly left the pickup truck and stole an unoccupied BMW after the driver stopped to help the injured motorist. Before taking the car, he tried to take a GMC Yukon from a driver who had stopped for the crash, but she was able to lock him out of the vehicle, police said. When the BMW owner saw that Talbert was taking his car, he tried to stop him. Andrew smirked at him and proceeded to pull a U-turn and flee the area, said one witness. Police say Talbert then drove to NovaCare Rehabilitation on North Main Street in Glassboro, walking inside and pulling down his pants, exposing his genitals to staff and patients.
Hey, look what I just did.
Yeah, this guy's awesome. Two patients intervened and forced Talbert to leave the building, police said, noting that an employee was not seriously injured. Because of the disturbance, NovaCare employees had moved patients into a neighboring building and locked the doors. Talbert tried unsuccessfully to break in, causing significant damage to the doors in the process. Talbert took off as police arrived, and he allegedly slammed the BMW into one of their vehicles, pitting Officer Darian Martinez between his open door and the police car. The officer was treated at the hospital for a rib injury and was released, but was very pissed off. From there, Talbert led officers on a pursuit, drove through a split rail fence, and ran head-on into a Ford Escort at Carpenter and Norway Streets. The BMW overturned, and a passenger in the Escort was thrown from the vehicle. Talbert resisted arrest, and officers had to use pepper spray, a taser, and a canine to take his sorry behind into custody, police said. He then proceeded to use his teeth to scrape blood into his mouth, and that he spit into the face of an officer. Oh, that officer was treated for exposure to bodily fluids, and I'm sure was not happy either. This gentleman was charged with 27 offenses, including multiple counts of assault by auto, carjacking, attempted aggravated sexual assault, criminal sexual conduct, and resisting arrest. It is not clear what sparked this rampage or why Talbert went to NovaCare, police said. He was taken to Salem County Correctional Facility, and he is pending a hearing.
It's no bullshit.
Wow. You know, I guess if you're going to do it right.
Do it right, young man. Good job. Dummy.
All right. Well, you know my penchant for the English language and grammar and trying to be, you know,
of course.
I compose fully, grammatically correct text messages. My girls think that's funny as everything, but I mean, it's just how I am. Well, here's one for you. A man's death is thwarted by a typo. Huh?
Okay.
Yep. Guess my old English teacher was right. When one misspelled word can really ruin your life. Have you ever just wanted to disappear? You could become somebody else and leave all your worries behind?
I've tried several times.
I'm still married, dang it. But everyone has those moments now and then when times get tough, but most of us don't try acting on it like this guy. Running from your problems rarely works. So the man in question here is Robert Berger, age 25, from Huntington, New York. He was charged in late July with filing a false instrument, which is a Category E felony.
Yes,
now, if convicted, he could face 1 to 4 years. Now, what is this particular false filing? What is it? A death certificate that he put in his own name to try to get out of trouble. It was printed on the right kind of paper, had all the right barcodes, markings, and even a signature. It looked authentic. He even had his attorney deliver it so that way it would look like it was coming from a legitimate source. The problem, when they looked at one particular place on the death certificate, despite the masterful work on getting the certificate to look real and feel authentic, Berger made a typo with the word registry. Instead of typing it registry, he typed registry, transposing the S and the I.
Good job.
Yes, the error was caught by an eagle-eyed district attorney. He promptly notified his superiors, who got in touch with the attorney who delivered the fake death certificate. So why did he do that? Well, he was already in trouble with the law. Apparently, he decided that if he could pass his as a death, he would get out of prior criminal troubles that he was already in. As we've heard from a different story not that many weeks ago, crime doesn't pay, but when you try to fake your own death, it only makes it worse. District Attorney Singis is flabbergasted at the behavior, saying, quote, "It will never cease to amaze me the lengths some people go to avoid being held accountable on criminal charges. Submitting fake documents to prosecutors is always a bad idea," she concluded. And that is the story of a man attempting to fake his own death, but thwarted by a typo.
It's amazing. It's astounding. But it's no bullshit.
You know, I think I said this the last time we had a fake your own death story. There's an episode of The Simpsons where Homer fakes his own death. if you're ever tempted to fake your own death, you need to watch that episode beforehand. And you will figure out that it never works.
It's never worth it. Never worth it. Not unless you're going to live with it for the rest of your life, but even still, because all it takes is just one eagle-eyed person to catch something, and boom, you're toast.
You're done.
Well done. All right, well, that's our news segment, so we'll rapidly move to what you and I have been watching or listening to or reading or whatever.
Well, I have been harassed by my friends to the point where I have finally broken down and started watching Yellowstone. And it's not actually about the park. It's a drama about a family that lives near the park. Have you watched this yet, Alan?
Not yet, but the previews I see, because it's on, is it on Amazon TV?
It's now on Paramount. Paramount has
Paramount, that's right. Paramount TV.
Yeah.
I had seen advertisements trying to convince you to get Paramount, and it looked really good. I just didn't want to subscribe to another service.
Yeah, I'm gonna kill a couple of the other services that I'm on right now because I'm just not watching them. But Paramount's got a lot of great stuff, and I guess they're in some sort of relationship with the Peacock app that is also out there. So Yellowstone is kind of divided. Season 1 is on 1 and 3 are on Peacock, and 2 is on Paramount. But I'm about halfway through season 1 now. Really good show, very well written, and of course Kevin Costner's in it, and he is really, really good. So I'm definitely enjoying that. Definitely worth watching. And the other thing that I'm spending all my time on is that the NHL playoffs have started. So I'm kind of tied up watching a lot of hockey.
Well, for me, binge watching, I'll just, it's a little boring from what it was last week, but I'm still doing the same thing. But because of camping, we had a little bit of a hiatus here this week. Still working my way through Bosch. Really, really liking Bosch. So I would give it 2 thumbs up to anybody who's never seen it. And still working my way through Star Trek The Next Generation. I'm midway through season 4. I think that's where I kind of was the last time I mentioned it. So I really, really am liking where the show's going. I love being able to go back and pick up episodes that I missed in syndication and reruns. So those are the 2 that I've been watching pretty much whenever I've had some free time. So I'm going to look to hopefully wrap those up, or at least wrap one of those series up so I can start going to something else. I really want to check out The Norseman that you recommended a couple of weeks ago.
It's such a great show. Definitely do not have the kids around when you watch it. But it's great. It's a great show.
I can tell you, I went on your recommendation. I watched The Old Guard with Charlize Theron.
Oh, yeah. How'd you like it?
It was a good movie. I think it left me not necessarily as satisfied as I wanted, but I also left me saying, if it does well enough, they've made it open to another movie to kind of continue the story. So we'll see how that goes.
And I'll tell you, at the end, that was a great shock. That does set you up for the next movie.
I will tell you though, in terms of, when things, I can tell when something's affected me when I keep dwelling on either a moment or a scene or maybe the whole movie days and days after watching it. And I don't want to give any of the premise away, but one of the subplots is a person who was going to be drowned. And then I put in my head, well, what must that be like to...
I did the same thing. Like, I lost sleep over that.
I lost sleep over it. I was like, oh my God. At what point would you maybe go insane?
About 5 minutes in.
Exactly.
It is crazy. But then, that I kept waiting. When is that going to come back?
Right.
And so, and it does. It comes around.
I think that's the link that you leave for if they make another.
Yes,
episode,
it is. Yeah.
So,
but well written. The acting is great. And that is one of those kind of movies for me that can go one way or another. That I either really like it or I really don't. I really, really like that one.
Yeah, no, and I would heartily recommend seeing it. I thought, and maybe because I watched it right after this other one, I did watch finally The Foreigner with Jackie Chan and Pierce Brosnan.
I've got that on my list. I've got to watch that. Was
so good. First of all, I had never really seen Jackie Chan because he's definitely older already. He's just older, period. But he acted sort of older. He was much slower. He does have some moves. You find out part of the reason he's hiding some of who he is later in the storyline, but he's not your typical Jackie Chan doing nonstop martial arts through the movie. It's basically about a father whose last surviving family member was killed in a bombing that is being blamed on a brand new radical wing of the NRA in Ireland, and he tracks some people down. And Pierce Brosnan is awesome as the foil for Jackie Chan. I would give this one 2 thumbs up. You got to check it out, The Foreigner.
Okay, I've just jotted that down. I'm going to have to watch that. You know, it's as bad listening to our show as we record it as it is listening to like Radio Labyrinth, where they're always recommending stuff. Because every time you recommend something, I'm like, ooh, I got to watch that.
Yeah. So. And the thing, you know, between the two of us with so much going on, we have precious little free time to watch stuff. So it's hard to wedge it all in.
It is. But at least if you watch a couple episodes of something, you're going to get a taste for it, and you know if it's something that you're going to like or not.
Right. Let's move on to, because we went long with Bill, so I want to go ahead straight to what you're listening to. What podcast, or just do you want to do a podcast shout out? Because we got a lot of good podcast friends out there as well.
Yeah, there's one that I really want to highlight that I don't think I've talked about before, and it's called the Butt Pod. Have you come across that one yet?
Make sure you enunciate that appropriately.
That is the Butt Pod. Butt Pod.
Butt Pod. I have never heard of that.
Okay, so Brent Butt is the person who is behind the show Corner Gas, which was a Canadian sitcom that, if you've never watched the show, it's on Amazon Prime, and Canada has a whole different way of making TV and movies and stuff like that. And so you just don't come across it here. It's not going to be shown on TV or anything like that. So I came across it on Amazon Prime. Somebody had recommended it to me, so I started watching it. It was one of the funniest sitcoms I've ever seen. And I think it runs 4 seasons. Great show. So Brent Butt, who is the brains behind that, started his own podcast, and he spends a lot of time interviewing other Canadian actors and actresses, and now he's getting into some more American folks. But his podcast is really, really good. It's humorous. It's also insightful. He's able to really kind of draw some stuff out of each of the different actors and actresses he talks to. So I would highly recommend, actually both. I would highly recommend you watch Corner Gas on Amazon Prime and listen to the Butt Pod.
Excellent. Any podcast shout outs you want to give?
Yeah, I'm always wanting to highlight some of the ones of our good friends in the world of Movies by Minute. And one that I kind of revisited a little bit this week, listened to a couple episodes, is the Blues Brothers Minute. And the Blues Brothers has always been one of my favorite movies, and those guys really did a great job of tackling that movie. So if you're looking for a good Movie by Minute podcast to check out the Blues Brothers Minute.
Yeah, it's Tom Taylor from the Indiana Jones Minute, along with some other folks. I think that's their second or third project as a different group of guys. They had done the Caddyshack Minute together, and then we went on to Blues Brothers.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And really with Tom, you can never go wrong with anything that Tom works on. He is he's really thorough in his research. He's very engaging. So anything you run across with Tom, you're going to enjoy.
All right, podcast shout-outs for me, because I haven't been able to listen to a whole lot. I'm actually behind on some of our friends, but I do want to give a podcast shout-out to 60 Minutes With. They're coming up on their 6-year birthday with that name.
Wow.
They updated their logo just recently, gave it a fresh coat of paint. They've got 9 different shows under that label of 60 Minutes With. So there's something entertainment-wise for pretty much everybody. From the UK, these guys are very, very funny. So check that out, 60 Minutes With. And, you know, we just recently had our friends from the Rocky Minute. I know we kind of gave them a plug when they were on with us, Doug and Jason. But I know that they're hard at work trying to get season 3 underway after some of the things going on in their lives. But so, you know, it's always great to go back and pick up seasons 1 and 2 if you missed it. And really, really a big shout out to the Real Queens of Queens. They're getting ready for their season 3. And season 2, and they have asked me if I would help create a new show intro for them. They're bringing on a third person, one of their friends, so that way they can have a triumvirate of female voices. They're all raised or live in the Queens area, and they're sort of like the Seinfeld of podcasts. You never know what they're going to talk about, but it's all from that living in Queens their whole life perspective. For me, having never been in New York, especially down in those areas, to hear, their stories growing up, being around our same age, so you start thinking about, well, what was high school like for them compared to where we went? And it's just great. And Fran and Kathy took care of all of season 1. They're bringing in a friend for season 2, and check it out, The Real Queens of Queens.
Yeah, and they are 2 characters. I've listened to several of their episodes, and they are great. So definitely check them out. Again, not safe for work, but a great podcast.
All right. That's going to wrap us up. Walt, I'll give you the duty, as I always do, to tell everybody how they can learn more about us.
Well, as always, the best way to find out anything about us is to go to our website, and that is thewilderride.com. And you'll find all kinds of stuff on us, bios, guest bios, episode lists, old episodes you want to listen to. From there, you'll also find links to our Patreon and to our Facebook page. If you go to our Facebook page, you want to follow us there, and then hit the next button that comes up to join our listeners group. Listeners group's awesome. It's kind of self-explanatory. It's our listeners. It's where our listeners go to play. You'll get some news on the show, but then you get a lot of also other entertainment and also in other great stuff. Going back to Patreon real quick, if you have a couple of dollars that you are not doing anything with and you want to help our show out, that would be a giant help to Alan and I. We foot the bills on this for the most part, but we've had some listeners step up and help us out, and they have just been awesome. And if you'd like to help us out a little bit, every little bit helps. You can subscribe monthly, and pretty soon the free content that's on Patreon will go back behind the paywall, so you can see on the list there what you may want to be able to listen to and check out. So that is that. Also, I'm going to spend a little time this week on our TeePublic page and try to get some new designs up. Some of them got taken down by TeePublic for some odd reason. So just need to get some new designs up so you can grab your shirts, your coffee mugs, your book bags, your pillowcases. I feel like I'm a Mel Brooks movie. Wilder Ride the pinup doll. Wilder
merchandising.
So check
Wilder
that out.
Ride the flamethrower. There you go. That's popular.
Now that would be awesome.
Well, folks, 3 words for you: rate, review, share. If you've liked this episode, take a second to put. What the hell was that?
I don't know. Something you said. My Apple Watch picked up and responded to you.
What the hell? Siri, shut up. I'm trying to get this out.
I honestly think it said serious. I am serious, and don't call me Shirley.
Don't call me Shirley. All right. Rate, review, share. If you've enjoyed this episode, at the very least, you can share it. Just go to your podcatcher of choice, put it in social media so that way other folks can stumble across it. If you've got a few extra seconds, give us a rating. And if you want to leave a review, we would love to hear from you. Might even get spotlighted on our own social media. So take just a few seconds, help us out. We love to give shout outs to other podcasts we love. If you're a podcast listener, do the same for the ones that you love, because that only helps grow their audience and keep them putting out the content that you're already enjoying. So that's it for me. Walt, got anything else?
No, I think I'm good. That was a great episode. I'm excited that Bill joined us, and I look forward to next week.
All right, folks, till next week, join us right back here. You know where to find us, right here on the Wilder Ride Listeners Lounge.
The Wilder Ride Listeners.
How about that? Bill's a big Gene Wilder fan. We didn't even get to talk much about it.
Oh, I know. We didn't even get to that.
Yeah, we're going to have to have him back at some point. Dude, that guy just go. Just nudge him. Just one little question and boom.
Don't you feel like with every guest we've had so far, we need to have them back?
Yes.
Every one of them are like, wait, I've got like 5 more questions.
I've got an idea. Season 4.
Hey, there you go.
Season 4, the revisits. Hey, what's it been like since the last time you were here?
Yeah, the Wilder's Ride Listeners Lounge.
The Listeners Lounge revisited.
There you go. Just keep extending the name.
People are like going, dear God, do they only know like 25 people? What's going on?
25 that'll talk to us.
Well, yeah, we know a lot of people. none of them want to go on the record.
Are you kidding? One with you?
Them?